Hello, everyone, and a good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Mary Irvin, and I am a member of the education team at the International Testing Agency. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second ITA Monthly Education webinar of 2022, Intelligence and Investigations. Before I introduce our topic fully and our panelists, please allow me to do some housekeeping. A reminder that we are delivering this webinar in 5 languages. On your Zoom menu, you should see a button called Interpretation. And by clicking on this icon, you can select a channel with your preferred language. I will be presenting this session in English, but you can also listen to the audio in Arabic, French, Russian, and Spanish. And some other housekeeping points. Please do use the chat function to tell us your name, role, and what sport you represent. You can also use the Q&A function to ask a question about intelligence and investigations for one of our expert panelists, and we will leave some time at the end of the session to address those. Now, please note that it goes without saying that whilst we encourage debate, interaction, and questions, we do not tolerate any kind of aggressive behaviour or abusive or racist language. And we trust you that you will all join us in the spirit of fairness, respect, and integrity. Finally, please note that we record all our webinars so that we can make them available on our website and also on our YouTube channel for those who are unable to attend the live session. Today's webinar is part of our educational monthly series that are publicly available and designed to tackle key anti-doping topics and to raise clean sport awareness. A big thank you to those of you who are our regulars, and a big welcome to anyone participating for the first time. We're very happy to have you all with us today. It's also my pleasure to introduce our official presenting partner for the second year, Inform Sport. Their investment allows us to deliver this webinar program free of charge in 5 different languages. Inform Sport is a global certification program for supplements that batch tests products for substances prohibited in sport. And as supplement contamination continues to be one of the leading causes of inadvertent doping, we encourage athletes and athlete support personnel to check all products before use at sport.wetestYoutrust.com. The ITA is also proud to be recognised by UNESCO as a leading international organisation for the delivery of anti-doping programmes. And this educational webinar is delivered with the support of the UNESCO International Convention Against Doping in Sport. So, on to today's topic of intelligence and investigations, or I&I, as you will hear me say for short during this webinar. I would like to invite our panelists to turn on their cameras, and would like to offer them a huge welcome to them today. They are all experts in the field of I&I and are here to share their knowledge and experiences with us all today. Firstly, I would like to introduce the ITA's head of I&I, Nicholas Raudenski. Now, in the world of sporting integrity, Nick has been both UEFA's integrity officer and FIFA's integrity manager prior to joining the ITA. Before moving to Europe, Nick spent 13 years working in law enforcement, including at the US Department of Homeland Security, across a number of roles, including criminal investigator, supervisory special agent, and deputy attaché abroad. Welcome to today's webinar, Nick.
Thanks so much, Mary.
It's good to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Next, I would like to introduce Günther Junger, the Director of I&I at WADA. Günther has been with WADA since 2016 and prior to joining the organisation, was part of their independent commission responsible for conducting investigations in doping activities. His career also includes being the head of the department of the Cybercrime Division at the BLKA in Germany, and prior to that, leading Interpol's Drugs Operational Unit and their newly created anti-doping section. Welcome to you too, Günther.
Thank you, Mary, and it's a great pleasure to be with you all and talk about my favorite topic. And thanks for inviting me.
Thanks very much. We're looking forward to hearing all your answers a little bit later on. And also joining us is Francois Marclay, the ITA's I&I manager and part of our cycling unit. Francois holds a PhD in forensic science and worked for the Swiss Laboratory for Doping Analysis for many years. During his time with the laboratory, he worked for the 2012 and 2014 Olympic Games. In 2015, he joined the Cycling Anti-Doping Foundation to build their I&I team, which joined forces with the ITA as of early last year. Welcome to you too, Francois.
Thank you, Mary. Hello, everyone. Happy to join you all today.
Thanks very much to all three of you. We're looking forward to hearing from you over the next hour. So, what are we going to cover in today's webinar? Well, on your screen, you can see the array of questions we would like to answer. Now, as you can imagine, we could be here all day talking about I&I. But what we hope to achieve in today's session is the chance to define intelligence, talk about how investigations are conducted, and why everyone involved in sport should know about how they can play their part and how they can report suspicious behaviour. So for the specialists listening today, we hope this will be a good refresher. And for others whom this topic is new, we hope you go away with a good introduction to this important topic. So first up, we will hear from Nick, who will address some of the first questions on this slide before we welcome back Günther and Francois for a panel discussion on these and other frequently asked questions. So over to you for the next section, Nick.
Thank you so much, Mary. Again, welcome to everybody. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I'm really overwhelmed by the amount of attendees that we have from all over the world, from Philippines to Argentina, to Costa Rica, to Russia and Kenya. It's really fantastic that we have so many there along. Not only that, but from international organizations, from law enforcement organizations, from NADOs, athletes and coaches. We also have a wide variety of experts already in the I&I field, either through integrity units or anti-doping I&I units. So it's a real pleasure to be with you here today. As Mary mentioned, this is going to be the basics in I&I. We don't have time to go through a master class, so to speak, as Mary alluded to. I think all the panel experts agree with me that we could go on for 3 hours or 3 days to talk about this topic, but we only have 1 hour, so I hope the translators can keep up. So here we go. Next slide, please. Taking a little bit of a historical view and how this all started and having a look at the WADA code in 2015, it broke down into 3 different sections, but it was outlined under Article 5.8, where anti-doping organizations had to take the responsibility to obtain, assess, process anti-doping intelligence from a variety of sources. It went on to say that it has to investigate atypical and adverse passport findings, as well as investigate any other analytical or non-analytical information or intelligence. That was slimmed down a little bit into the 2021 code under Article 5.7, where, simply put, as you can see on the screen, have the capability to conduct and shall conduct investigations and gather intelligence as required. So that puts us all on the level of what we need to do. Let's take a look at the next slide. If we take a look at all of the articles of anti-doping rule violations, you'll see there are 11 of them up from 2.1 to 2.11 but we've broken them down just to show you a little bit of a visual between which of those articles can solely be proved or evidence provided related to testing, and then all of those that are related to the I&I sphere. And as you can see, testing only gets us so far in proving some of these anti-doping rule violations. We can't get some of them without I&I, without gathering intelligence and doing investigations in this space. And so this stresses really the importance of I&I in this space. Next slide, please. Again, as I mentioned, we're going to go over the basics of intelligence, but what I want to impress upon you is that we need to be taking an I&I approach across everything that we do. This Intel-led approach has to go across all of our different sections, across testing, across science and medical, across all the ways that we collect information, all the ways that we implement our anti-doping programs across the board. And what I want to be clear about in the I&I space is I&I doesn't take somebody's place, but we add value onto those other programs. We provide additional information, which helps testing become, for example, more stringent. But Intel, and I find this very, very inquisical, is it's often overlooked across a wide variety of sports integrity functions. If you look at match fixing, if you look at corruption in sport, Intel is often entirely forgotten. And I don't fully see how we can conduct intelligence or investigations and have the full picture without sources, without a real focus on intelligence. And further, this gathering of intelligence that we're going to talk about needs to be focused almost in a client or a consumer basis. And this means if we collect the intelligence and it's not useful for you as the client or the consumer, then we need to change our methods, right? And finally, as you can see at the bottom, it's my favorite thing to say, intelligence informs policy decisions. Without good intelligence, we can't make an accurate decision. We can't make an informed decision. And so we need to continue to adapt these approaches. Next slide, please. At its very rudimentary basis, information plus analysis equals intelligence. Many people often think that information is intelligence, but it's not the same. Information needs to be assessed. It needs to be put into context. It needs to be assessed if it's reliable, if it's accurate. And then the goal is to turn that analysis into information which feeds actionable intelligence, things that we can do something with. Again, through this assessment, we need to put all the information and intelligence that we have into context and into a narrative that we can talk about. Next slide, please. I say this to many of my colleagues, and you've probably heard me say it before, but simply put, intelligence doesn't grow on trees. We can't walk outside and pick it like an apple off of a tree and then all of a sudden have intelligence. We have to plan for it. We have to come up with an idea of where we're going to get that intelligence and how we're going to collect it. We need to go through the process of collecting it and then coming back to the table, evaluating that, conducting analysis. What does that mean in the context of what we're trying to look at? And then disseminate that to our partners. As I mentioned, this intelligence isn't just going to sit within our I&I unit. We need to push it out to our partner organizations, to law enforcement, to our fellow departments within the ITA, for example. And then the most important point, as I said before, is feedback. We need to get feedback that the intelligence is actually useful. Did it help with the process? If not, we have to go back and we have to continue to tweak our intelligence collection. Next slide, please. Simply put, intelligence can't do the following things. It cannot predict the future. We always hear about, oh, well, the intelligence was wrong. The intelligence can't predict the future. It can't know about everything that there is, and it simply can't always be right. And so we have to put that into context when we consider what intelligence is and how we utilize it. Next slide, please. Some of the sources of intelligence in the anti-doping context, of course, we're sitting on wide mountains of data that we need to be able to process, from the passport, from TUEs, from whereabouts data, to performance data and raw data that we can ingest. We often talk about in the I&I space, OSINT or SOCMINT. That's social media intelligence or open source intelligence that we can collect that's out there in the public sphere. And we get a lot of intelligence from investigative interviews, developing human sources, the ways that whistleblower reports come in from humans. It's the only way that we get this directly from a human source is through those interviews and through the development of what's called human intelligence. This is the only one that the source, the collector, speaks directly to the source. And most importantly, and you can see it there on the screen in red, the access to this information is not obtainable in any other way. And that means there may be 2 people in the room, 3 people in the room, and they're the only witnesses to what happened. So developing those human sources are so critical in what we're doing. And that's what exactly the goal is, to develop these long-term human sources. Next slide, please. As I said, we need to approach this in a consumer-based client approach, right? We need to make sure that the intelligence is usable by the consumers. I put it down that this phrase at the bottom: intelligence is not the end itself, but instead it's a means to an end. We're not just going to sit on intelligence. We want to be sure that it's used and it's disseminated and that's pushed out in a certain way. And now what we're going to do, next slide, please. We're going to put you, the user, the audience, into an analysis scenario. So we're going to put you into the case where you're going to be the intelligence analyst, excuse me. And so we're going to talk about what is an inference. An inference development is central to the analytical process, right? It's the role of intel analysis to make inferences with the information that we have. It's in its simplest form, it's an explanation of what we think what we see or what we think that's going on. And so I'm going to ask you the following question. The next slide. Please analyze this photo. And some of my colleagues from ITA have already seen this, so please don't ruin the scenario. But what can we infer from this picture? We look at the advertisement substance. It's making an advertisement for some sort of adhesive. This is located on some sort of building or a street. What can we tell about that street? Does it look paved? Does it look like a dirt street? What can we tell about the dog? Is it wild? Is it domestic? Does it have a collar and tags? Where do we think this photo is potentially taken? Where do we think in the world this potentially could be? And what about the shadows? Could we infer what time of the day it is? But let's focus on the main point here. Are these people going to kiss or not? Next slide, please. So now you as the Intel analyst, and Mary, please pop open the poll for us. What level of confidence do we have that these people are going to kiss? Is it a probability of highly likely, somewhere above 90%? Do you have only confidence level of it being likely, anywhere from 60 to 90%? Is there an even chance that these people are going to kiss, 40 to 60%? What about, could it be unlikely that these people are going to kiss based on the information that you have? Or is it highly unlikely that these people are going to kiss? And so give another little bit of time to get some more votes in. How are we looking, Mary? Good, let's go ahead and show the poll. So people think that there's an even chance. Some people think it's highly likely that they're going to kiss. Let's go ahead and close that poll and show you, expand your horizons a little bit. Next slide, please, Armando. Next slide, please. Well, what you can see is once we potentially draw inaccurate conclusions with not having the full amount of information. The narrative could have been that we were confident that these people were going to kiss based on the information that we had. But the other inferences could steer us. Is giving a kiss on a street that's not paved with a wild dog next to it, Is that the right place that people are going to start making out? Maybe it's late in the day and, you know, the mood really struck them and they wanted to get romantic in the middle of a public street. But giving a passionate kiss in front of a wild dog on a public street at this time, potentially what we think is in India, is highly unlikely. And so we need to expand our viewpoint, expand the picture in this case to fully get the entire picture. So next slide, please. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of investigations. And I always lead off any speech that I give about investigations with the misconceptions of what investigations are. Next slide, please. So I don't remember if I got this from The Wire, which was a US program, or another cop show, but there's a famous scene where Officer 1 says, well, I don't know, what do you think we should do? He says, I don't know, let's go interview somebody, right? And that's a misconception of investigations, that the first step is always going to be, let's go interview somebody. Next slide, please. What's the purpose of an investigation? So ask yourself, as a participant in today's INI, is it to prove guilt or innocence? Do you think the purpose of an investigation is to prove guilt or innocence? Please click through. I will present to you that it is in fact not the purpose of an investigation. What we operate as investigators is a fact-finding process. We need to go through our evidence-based collection processes within the criteria and the laws that we have. It's a standard, repeatable, and consistent process that we go through, right? We're not, as investigators, the judges or the jury, we're not proving guilt or innocence. We're finding facts and nothing more than that. Next slide, please. So undertaking an investigation, many times people say, is it an art? Is it a science? I think it's a little bit of both. It's always a dynamic and a very fluid process, and your scope can change during that process as new information is uncovered. There's never a one-size-fits-all approach that you can take. It's not a linear process, and it's often complex. It's cross-border. It can be cross-jurisdictional that you have to take. Next slide, please. But for the most part, there are three main phases. The commencement, which comes from a trigger or triaging when the cases are coming in. We need to ask ourselves, what are we trying to prove in this investigation? And then we go through the information gathering phase. Did we establish or rule out any involvement? Did we collect? Did we interview? Did we analyze the data that we have? And finally, conclusions. And this is often widely overlooked, to put everything together in a nice, neat package for prosecution. So let's take a look at the next slide. This is the WADA process for investigations, and Gunter will be happy that I put this up. I only want to focus on the area in green, but you can see for the most part, this has 4 stages, but it's about similar concept: collect, analyze, investigate, and conclude. But across all of those stages is collect, collect, collect. Next slide, please. I also wanted to take an opportunity to benchmark one of our colleagues in the International Tennis Integrity Agency, right? They have a fantastic process. This is from A to Z on how the INI cycle goes throughout disciplinary. But what does it start with? Intelligence. Intelligence feeding investigations. This is perfect stuff. And I love the part, has a corruption offense been committed, yes or no? Very simple. Next slide, please. They further break it down into 5 different sections: gathering intelligence, assessing all the information, opening an investigation, conducting interviews of suspects, analyzing the data, and then finally, and the most important, turning that evidentiary file over to the prosecutors. Again, excellent stuff from our tennis colleagues. Next slide. I'd also like to thank our colleagues that are joining us on the call from UNODC. What UNODC does is brilliant. They put out fantastic manuals. I think many of us on the call today were involved in this one, but it's just a snapshot about how complex an investigation can be. This is in the context of match fixing, but you can see all the different steps that are involved in an investigation. Next slide, please. I'll conclude with this, and we all work in sports integrity, and our responsibility is to ensure that the cases are upheld before the Court of Arbitration in Sport. But CAS has come out and said that they consider the restricted powers of the investigative authorities of the sports governing bodies as compared to the police. They know that we're limited in what we can do, but they also give us a very good insight that corruption is by nature concealed. And the parties try to use evasive means whenever possible. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Mary, and we'll bring in some of our expert panelists to continue to talk about these topics, about some of the challenges that we have and what we're doing to try to overcome them. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks so much for that, Nick. It certainly was a whistle-stop tour, but really important and interesting information for everyone to be aware of. I particularly like the poll question and the photo. I have seen that before I knew what the answer was going to be, but when you showed me this for the first time, I would definitely have clicked the highly likely button. So yeah, really fascinating stuff. Now, before we move on to the next section, which is the panel Q&A, I do just want to acknowledge everyone who's saying hi in the chat. I can't do a name check on all of you, but I, at least while Nick was talking, attempted to at least write all the countries that you represent. So hopefully I've at least captured all of those. So I'm going to say hi to you all in Brazil, Estonia, Qatar, Japan, Argentina, Bhutan, Costa Rica, Nepal, Zimbabwe, France, South Africa, Thailand, Pakistan, Kenya, Slovakia, Malaysia, Romania, Panama, Greece, Azerbaijan, Korea, Portugal, Germany, Peru, India, Switzerland, the Philippines, Ireland, Indonesia, Hong Kong, and Spain. I'm seeing more and more countries being added to the chat there, but I think it's wonderful just to see that we're reaching all corners of the globe, and it's fantastic to have you all with us. So great that you are all using the chat. Don't forget as well that you can use the Q&A function to ask a question of our panelists, and we'll get through as many as we have time for at the end of the session. And talking of panelists, I would like to welcome back Gunther and Francois for this next section of the webinar, where we are going to ask them some key frequently asked questions in this field. Welcome back to you both. And Gunther, if I could come to you first, having heard that overview of INI from Nick, what would you like to add from your work leading the INI team at WADA?
Thank you, Mary, and I congratulate Nick. He gave a very good overview already about in 15 minutes, which is quite impressive. But I would like perhaps to highlight some really important aspects, and one is really that the importance of presenting facts and not opinions. And perhaps you can do the test with yourself. If you write a report, findings, and then you give it to someone else, is that please read through and give me all the emotions and all the opinions that I put in the report. And you will be surprised how many you have still in the report. And this is where we in our department, we read reports, or I do the final review, where I especially look whether we focus on the facts or not. The other part is that, from my point of view, is very important to separate investigation from result management. In the lifetime of an investigation, there's a lot of emotions, because you want to do a good job, you want to present something good, and so you're emotionally involved in perhaps in the outcome. And I think that is as well something important, that we separate that someone, a third party, the result management, looks over the report and said, this is what I think should be done, or should be the punishment. Sometimes a bit painful, because you expect a bit more, but I think it's a very good concept. The other part, and Nick touched it upon, is the source management. Is when you have sources and you gather intelligence, that you separate the source management, so whistleblower management, from investigation as well. Because the investigator should focus on the case and should make sure that all the evidence will be presented, all the facts. while the source manager should focus on the protection of the whistleblower. So he's more or less the voice of the whistleblower and is the bridge to the investigator. For instance, in my department or in our department, none of my investigators will learn the identity of our sources. It doesn't matter. And it helps as well the investigator to stay clear in the approach. So when you have all these important aspects, then you should tailor your system to and your resources to what you actually want to achieve. So for our department, and we started with 3, now we are 17. So we have 3 units, which is the source management, the investigation unit, and the compliance unit. So therefore, it's very important because not everyone has 17 people. Perhaps you're 1, 2. So you need to tailor that to your respective resources. In the last 5 years, just to give you an idea of, in none of our cases or in every case, we had whistleblowers involved, and we could charge more than 250 athletes or officials. That's quite impressive from my team, and it's all based on intelligence, as we said, and not only on information, because information needs always be corroborated or analyzed and then becomes intelligence.
Thanks, Gunther. Now, as Nick mentioned earlier as well, we could be here for 3 days, 3 weeks talking about I&I, but we have a short time today, obviously, and I think it's important as well that the audience hears about I&I from lots of different angles. And the very nature of the work in a sporting context does have limitations as well, doesn't it? And maybe you could sort of address what some of those are.
Yeah, and I have to say, when I started in a sport organization, I'm still police officer. I'm seconded from the Bavarian police. The biggest suffer I had to cope with was that we don't have the power as law enforcement has. We cannot seize material, cannot do wiretapping or search warrants. So as a sport organization, we focus mainly on, as Nick as well highlighted, open source or social media or voluntary interviews. And in particular, as we know, out in the open source, it's not always 100% true what is in the public domain. It needs to be further corroboration. Also for interviews, and I like that what Nick brought up or pulled up. I mean, you have to convince somebody that he or she has committed something, and you just can knock on the door and say, "Hello, I think you have done this or that," and they will say, "Okay, you knocked on my door. I admit." So therefore, you need to have a strategy. You need to have a plan for that. Sometimes when it's postulated in the public discussion, get interviewed, or this person needs to be interviewed, that's absolutely nonsense. Interview is the most complex part in an investigation and needs a thorough preparation. Therefore, this is why whistleblowers are so important in our work, because they can give us access to some evidence or give us knowledge about intelligence, about what's going on. And this is very important for the preparation and the interviews. And therefore, one reason why we at WADA has really invested lots of resources in order to make sure that we address this limitation that we have as a sport organization with whistleblowers.
Thank you. Yeah, you've alluded already to sort of addressing and overcoming some of these limitations. Is there anything else you'd like to sort of draw everyone's attention to, the work that is being done to try and overcome this?
One of the most important point are alliances. You need partners in this sport world, and we have lots of good partners, and alliances are more and more important. Another part is law enforcement agency. However, doping, and I know that from my previous life, is not a priority for law enforcement. Therefore, you need to have good reasons, but as well, like Europol stated in the last report, more and more organized crime group goes into this area because there's a lot of money, lots of profit, but less detection. So therefore, it's really highly recommended that wherever you are, that you reach out to your law enforcement and see whether the law allows you to share information amongst each other. because that's the key. Law enforcement doesn't have perhaps the resources to get all the knowledge from sport that we have, but we don't have the power that they have. So I think it's a perfect symbiosis to overcome that. As well, we realize that even in sport, that we don't have enough I&I capacities in the world of sport. There's far more information out there. There's far more whistleblowers who would like to speak up, but we don't have the capacity, or we don't process or harvest enough. This is where that we proposed a European Union capacity building project, which was granted and will take the next 2 years, lots of resources of my team, but I think it's a good investment to bring up more I&I capacity and bring law enforcement and NATOs together in Europe. And then if it works well, then we will extend this project to a global project. And the final restriction, if I may add, is a legal restriction. Sometimes in countries, doping is not considered as a crime, which reduces the possibility to include law enforcement. Therefore, we encourage every country to have respective law in place.
Thank you. And maybe if I could bring Francois into this one as well. What would you like to add from your side in this area?
Thank you, Mary. And yeah, Günther said it all almost. Well, to start with, we do have existing investigative capacities in-house. You know, we have a team of I&I specialists, including investigators, intelligence officers and analysts. We have forensic scientists, first handlers, etc. And we have all these people, plus the investigative tools and the technology. On the other hand, we also collaborate, as Günther just mentioned, with national anti-doping organizations and law enforcement authorities. And as a way of example, we collaborate with the NATO and the law enforcement of the country on all 3 cycling grand tours that are the Tour de France, Giro d'Italia, and the Vuelta a España. And currently, we also have a memorandum of understanding underway with the French law enforcement authorities, with a particular view on the Paris 2024 Olympic Games. Also, we rely on and push the existing investigative powers with sports regulation. The general framework is defined by the code, of course, the WADA code, but some international federations push it a little bit further. It can provide additional investigative powers. Now, if we only look at the WADA code, it says that athletes, support persons, and other persons subject to the code have a requirement to cooperate with anti-doping organizations investigating anti-doping rule violations. And therefore, they have a duty to collaborate, and we can demand for information and documents. And likewise, we can also request them to participate to interviews. And if there are no documented powers, then we ask, of course, for consent to document and record these interviews. Also, not to forget that one key strength of the ITA, and speaking for the ITA, is having experts in every single aspect of anti-doping in one house. We work hand in hand with all other departments here at the ITA, particularly testing, the science and medical department, as well as legal, for a full 360 view to address any issue as comprehensively as possible. We have constant bilateral exchanges. We involve these departments in the investigative process, and it is very much a unified effort.
Thank you, Francois. And if I come back to Günther now, let's switch to another important aspect of I&I. You've mentioned them already several times, and that is whistleblowers. But I think people would be really interested in hearing how you could convince a whistleblower to come forward and to report suspicious behavior.
That's a very good question, Mary. And what you need is empathy. Try to put yourself in the shoes of a whistleblower to understand their concerns and fears. There's a lot of emotions involved, especially to be brave enough to come forward. You expose yourself, you don't know what is happening. So therefore, one key element is take them seriously, whatever reason they might come up with. It is not up to us to judge the situation or downgrade the fear that the people have. Sometimes emotions or perceptions are more dangerous than the actual threat. So therefore, it's very important to explain the process in the first contact of how the information will be processed, that the whistleblower need to know what they keep, that they keep control of the information. They can always stop at one stage and say, no, I don't like it anymore, and you need to respect that. Keep the whistleblower informed during the process, because nothing can be more discouraging or uncertainty of what is happening now with my information. I don't hear anything from my partner there. Nothing happens with the information. So what is the status? And suddenly they start getting anxious about the situation they are. So therefore, it's very important to constantly contact them and be in contact with them and guide them through the investigation. Sometimes you need to have patience, and they need to know that sometimes it's not as fast as they sometimes wished that it's going forward. But it's also important that the planning and the strategizing of the investigation doesn't endanger the identity of the whistleblowers. Therefore, it can take a while, but if you have the right persons next to you, then it will help. For security. And as well, it's the trust that you should gain, and that whatever you do, that none of your identities or none of the identities of the whistleblowers will be disclosed, because then if you have a good reputation, and I can see from Speak Up from 2016, we have more than 1,000 tips, and they speak to each other, and suddenly they say, yeah, we had this and this contact. They worked well with you. Can we work together? And this is how it works usually. At the end, it is really important, the trust that you build a relationship to your partner or to your whistleblower. And this goes both sides. It's not only one side that we trust them, but also they need to trust us. And therefore, it's really important to build the relationship. And because nothing is more dangerous than let's say discouraging the person. And as soon as you destroy once the trust, it can hardly be built. It's like a mirror. You can break it, you can fix it, but you always see the cracks. So in this respect, work really hard to earn and to maintain the trust of the whistleblowers.
Thanks, Günther. And I'd like to go into trust in a little bit more detail with you in a few minutes, a little bit more depth. But first off, I think maybe, Francois, that this also leads us nicely into talking about the different reporting mechanisms that exist. So perhaps you could spend a couple of minutes talking about the Reveal platform.
Absolutely, Mary. Well, human intelligence is playing an indispensable role within the ITA INI space. It's widely recognized as one of, if not the most valuable source of anti-doping intelligence. So it is therefore vital that athletes, sport actors in general feel confident to report potential breaches, that they trust the organization to whom they're reporting, and that they're provided with the opportunity to report these issues. And therefore, the ITA launched its own doping reporting platform called Reveal on February 1st of last year, 2021, to offer additional opportunities for the confidential and encrypted, and if they so wish, anonymous reporting of information. And if you ask me, I think the beauty of the platform is for the source to have the option to open a secure mailbox, to enable further confidential communications, to exchange with the ITA, to build that trustworthy relationship and provide additional intelligence. It's very important for me that the source can remain anonymous throughout the entire process if they so wish, but they also can provide their contact details if they prefer, or open that mailbox. Every option is on the table actually, and they're not obliged to anything. They don't have to do anything they don't want to do. Then the reporting is handled exclusively by the INI team of trained and experienced source handlers. We review and triage every message. We assess the credibility of the source and reliability of the information that is provided to us. We analyze, we grade the content, and make recommendations for follow-up. Another aspect, an important aspect, is the whistleblowing policy, which outlines how information may be transmitted to the ITA securely and confidentially, and how any such information will be securely handled by the ITA. As source handlers, we do have responsibilities with that regard. Likewise, the collection and the processing of personal data is governed by the privacy policy in accordance with the applicable data protection laws. And finally, one important aspect is that confidential human sources can report in any language they want. And the platform is translated in a couple of languages as of today: English, French, Mandarin, Spanish, Russian, and Arabic. Armando, if you can, yes, thank you. So who can report and what can be reported? Well, anyone can report, regardless of who you are, where you come from, which language you speak, etc. We absolutely encourage anyone out there with knowledge of doping or suspecting doping on reasonable grounds to contact us. What can be reported? Well, information on any suspected or known anti-doping rule violation can be reported, but not only. We also encourage confidential sources to report any act or omission or any other allegation that could undermine the work we're conducting, which is the fight against doping. And why report? Well, you may tell yourself, I feel that the information I have is not worth ITA's attention. Well, quite the contrary. Every single piece of the puzzle is very welcome, and your little piece could be the only one missing and that we have been looking for, actually. When I read a book, I don't read just the beginning and the end. I need to read everything in between to understand the story. So this is pretty much the way it is. So maybe I can also give you a little tour of Reveal. So we will play a video. Armando, you can start the video at any point. Okay, so this is how the web page is looking like. You can select the language that you want. You got then a description of the platform and the message to potential confidential sources. You've got these buttons with the option to report. There, you will select what type of anti-doping rule violation you want to report about. In that case, the use of a product. You can select the, you have to select the sport. I use cycling. Then you have fields that are not necessarily mandatory, but it's always better to provide more information in which country is it taking place. We have a large selection here. I put Switzerland on purpose, of course, because we are based here. And then, do you know anything about the location? I put Lausanne. It's obviously not happening in the ITA office, but anyway, when a few days ago, who is involved? John Smith, I think it's a pretty common name out there. Have you reported that to someone else? As Gunther said, they have Speak Up, we have Reveal. So it's always important for us as source handlers to know if it has been reported to someone else in a way of coordinating our efforts. You can also add files, video records, documents, anything you want. And then comes the part about confidentiality, staying anonymous. You can select that, unselect that. You can open a mailbox. You maybe don't want to open a mailbox. It's a one-off thing. I report and I move away, or I report and I create that mailbox. So you need to enter a password, which needs to be complicated and which needs to be remembered. But I think this is a pretty common language in these days. So I tried to put a good password there. You got a link to the whistleblower policy. You have to, and the privacy policy, and you have to check that you did read both, so you know what are the, well, in my case, the password was not strong enough, so I need to add some special characters. So I think that was a good example of how security is important to us. So moving on, then, well, you got a small math equation to resolve. It's not overly complicated, to be honest. And then this report is submitted to the ITA, and you get a case ID and your password, which is your PIN code. And these are pretty much your login details. If you are using the same computer, the same browser, you will only have, when you go back to the Reveal mailbox, which is highlighted here, you only have to put your PIN. And at the bottom left, you see a little explanation on how this works, and of course, links to the whistleblowing policy and privacy policy. If you use a different computer, if you use your mobile phone and then your computer, you will have to re-enter your case ID and your password. But same computer, same device, same browser, just the password. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you,
yes.
Thank you, Francois. We'll move on to the next question, but I'm pleased to say that we already have 5 questions from participants. in the Q&A box. So if I could ask you to do a quick overview on the next slide, so that we can sort of push on and try and tackle some of those questions.
Yes,
And I
no
suppose
problem.
here it'd be nice to talk about the sort of reverse, because in addition to people coming forward, there's also some outreach work, and maybe you could explain quickly to the audience what that is.
Yes, thank you. Well, reveal is reactive. You wait for people to come to you, and outreach is the opposite. You actually try and be proactive in your identification and recruitment of potential human sources. The underlying principle is to establish and maintain trustworthy relationships with athletes, athlete support persons, both active and recently retired, fresh off the sport, to acquire in a more direct and targeted manner solid intelligence on areas of specific interest. We have at the moment a wide-ranging coverage of genders, always trying to expand on that, on continents, on teams and disciplines, to bring as much knowledge as possible on the matter at hand, and to ensure that whenever we have a question or an issue to address, we know who to reach out to. Also, one fruitful relationship with a confidential source can lead to being referred to another potential confidential source. I had a good experience with you. You should contact my friend X, and voila. So both approaches are complementary to each other.
Thanks, Francois. And similarly, Günther, if we come back to you and back to this sort of question of trust and building trust, again, it would be good if we can get to the live questions soon. But I think it's also very important, you know, with whistleblowers, people who might be listening, might be thinking about coming forward, that they understand how they can trust an organization that they're reporting to.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. And I will keep it short, I promise. But let's do an experiment. Think about your deepest secret, Mary, and would you share that with me? And I see with your smile, now I'm interested, but of course you would not at this stage, because there are conditions that you would consider to share. For me, what are the factors that influence? It's the relationship. Who are you? Have you expertise in this area? Can I build a relationship with this person? The confidentiality, what happens with my information when I share it? Have I still access, or stop? Can I stop the process when I'm not comfortable? Do I get information during the investigation? Can I meet with my source handler whenever I need him? Is he my counselor during the process, or is he the counselor for the case? Reliability, is something really happening with the information, or is it just, you know, it goes in a hole and nobody comes back to me? Care, do I get counseled what is good for me or is good for the case? I really want someone who counsels me, because I cannot talk to anyone about my case. So all these case questions that needs to be addressed, and in the first contact is so important that this relationship build up, and that the whistleblower understands that they're still in control, and that we are here to listen and to act on behalf of the whistleblower.
Thanks, Günther. And similarly, Francois, now that we've talked about the theory, I think it would also be interesting for the audience to hear how a case might have worked in practice. So could you take us through that quickly too?
Yes, I'll be quick. So we had one professional cyclist reporting via the online platform that someone he did not want to mention offered him through a friend in common some unnamed performance enhancing method. The source did not want to mention who that friend in common was, did not know the name of the person offering the performance enhancing method, and anything about the method itself. The source only specified that 2 other riders were apparently clients of this person and were using the method to great success. So this was our first contact with the source, and the initial impression was quite poor, to be honest, as the picture was very blurry. Also, it happened all happened the day after that rider lost a race he had targeted, and he was beaten actually by these 2 other riders. So at this point in time, his motivation was questionable, and the information itself was very lacking. We had very little to work with, but nevertheless, we established a trustworthy relationship with that person over days and weeks, via phone calls and then in-person face-to-face meetings. And that led to the source opening up and sharing names and sharing additional and corroborating intelligence, which significantly improved our assessment of the credibility of the information and obviously of the reliability of the source himself. To complement the intelligence picture, we identified several persons of interest with potential knowledge of doping activities in connection to the matter. So we reached out and we had the opportunity to meet with some. So between the confidential reporting of information and that secondary outreach initiative, we were able to acquire extensive intelligence and with a very positive outcome. And you see it at the bottom of the slide. Actually, we moved from left to right, and right is just like a fraction of the actual network that we built.
Thanks, Francois. And if we welcome Nick back at this stage as well, and just switch, maybe I could ask Gunther to sort of quickly allude to what the future looks like for confidential reporting, and then we'll go to the audience Q&A.
Okay, thank you. And I will keep it short. The future is ahead of us, so therefore we have still time. But I think my opinion is that we are still not using the full potential of intelligence coming from whistleblowers, and we need to get more professionals in this area. We are in a good way if you see the evolution, and if you see the ITA, who was funded and founded and in this respect built up really good capacity in this area, and we need these partners in the sport to tackle that. Also, I think we think is when comparing the testing results and the IAFs that we get with testing, we are less than 1%. I think we can be better in this area, and we can perhaps provide more intelligence in order to make it testing more efficient. Also, the increase of law enforcement engagement in doping cases in the last 5 years is very promising, and I think it's a good step forward because we need alliances, as I highlighted, and it's a perfect symbiosis. And all together, I think we can do a big difference in sport.
Thank you, Gunther. And thank you, all three of you. Nick, before we switch to Q&A, is there anything you'd like to summarize there?
No, I just want to jump into some of these questions because I think that they're going to be fantastic sort of discussion pieces. Hopefully we can.
Perfect. Well, we're going to quiz through the resources slide because everyone will get those links when we send you the PDF shortly. And let's go to the first question then, which is test costs is difficult to be covered by clubs or minor federations. How could we encourage, I think, governments or NOCs to help? My first thought here is that would be a question for our testing team. So I would invite this person to write into us. But before I move to the next one, is just in case I'm wrong, is there anything that anyone would like to add here?
Yeah, the only thing that I wanted to add on this point is it exactly shows how it's everybody's responsibility. It's not just the responsibility of, and I believe my brother from Botswana, Andrew Kamanga, said the same thing. He's a one-man show in the office. It's everybody's responsibility. It's not just the responsibility of the NODO. It's just not the responsibility of the National Federation or the IF. Everybody has to be involved, from the NODO to law enforcement to the federations. And so we need to encourage that and bring everybody to the table and prove their responsibility to be part of the solution.
Thank you. And the next one, I think, it'd be interesting to hear quickly from both Gunther and Nick. And this alludes to the partnerships that you both talked about earlier. The question is from Indonesia. And according to your experience, what institutions in your country should we partner with in detecting doping in sports tournaments?
Nick, you want to start?
Yeah, as I just stated, the institutions that have to be involved are, name everything that I've just talked about: the NODOs, law enforcement, IFs, NFs, international, intergovernmental organizations, all need to be a part of that solution.
And perhaps to add, perhaps private companies, pharma industries, they're sometimes very interested in this area and might help as well. So you should have really a holistic approach, see what is available, And then even if it's at, from not the traditional way of cooperation, reach out, and you would be surprised how helpful sometimes organizations can be.
Thank you. And then next one, also interesting. What is the role of government to investigate or support in investigation as per the Copenhagen Declaration?
I'm not sure whether I understand the question. In Copenhagen Declaration, whether you refer to the human rights, but of course the governments are responsible of providing the right resources to enable the national anti-doping agencies to follow the code and to fulfill the codes and the requirements of the codes. But of course, resources are always a big problem, and this is even more important, that you have a good strategy of how to use resources efficiently. And one is intelligence, and not just going out and do tests, but really invest in some intelligence-based analysis and then do the tests.
Thank you, Gunther. We are on time. It's 3 o'clock already in Switzerland here, but the next one I think is really important and interesting as well. So if we can hang on for a couple of minutes, I'd love us to tackle this one, which goes back to the question of resources. And it's RADOs have limited capacity. It's usually one person in the office. How can they contribute effectively to investigations and intelligence?
I think I think you're the eyes and ears, and I would say this to all the athletes, to all the coaches, to all the administrators that are on the webinar today. As Francois said, you're the eyes and ears in the sport. You have a responsibility. You have a little piece of the puzzle that can help. And as Gunther just said, intelligence informs testing policy. So we shouldn't waste money just randomly throwing darts. It should be an intelligence-led process. But you as a one-man operator, you see, you hear, you know a lot more things than we don't, that we might not be able to see.
Thank you. And I'm sorry we weren't able to get through all your questions, which is often the way in these webinars. So if you do still have questions, you want to drop us a line, there are several email addresses here on screen. You can reach out to us at Education or the INI team, or of course you can use the Reveal platform as well. So that really wraps up today's webinar. I want to say a massive thank you to our panelists, Gunther, Nick, and Francois. And of course, a big thank you to you, our audience, for participating in such large numbers from so many countries today. As mentioned earlier, you will receive the slides shortly after the webinar ends. We also have a very short survey. We would love if you could spend a couple of minutes just giving you some feedback. And finally, if you would like to receive updates from the ITA, including information on our next webinar, please sign up using the link you will find on the slide. So once again, a massive thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our audience. And I wish you all a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much. Take care.